Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yes.
Today we are wading into some pretty fraught territory.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about that dramatic collision of artificial intelligence, music, and of course, intellectual property law.
Right.
We've got a stack of sources here that go way beyond just, who's suing whom. We're really going to get into the philosophical, the economic stakes of these legal battles.
Things like the big action against AI generators, like Suno, for example.
Exactly, from Warner Music and others.
And our mission for you today is, I think, really precise. We need to move past that simple story of AI is stealing music.
Yeah, that's too simple.
It's way too simple. We're going to try and dissect the deep internal contradictions, the legal inconsistencies that are really shaping what creativity is going to look like for humans and for machines.
So it's not just the facts, it's the why, the power struggles behind it all.
It's all about the why.
Because when you really look at the debate, the legal papers, it's not just about Suno. It's a deeper argument about who owns creativity itself, who profits, and ultimately who decides the rules. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with what I think is the most compelling part of this whole thing. It's this central philosophical paradox that our sources keep coming back to. Think about it this way. A human musician, right? A guitarist, a composer, whatever. They spend their whole life listening to thousands of hours of music.
Right, just absorbing everything.
Exactly. Absorbing patterns, chord progressions, and then they transform all that influence into something new, something personal. And we call it education. We call it creativity. We celebrate it.
What's fascinating here is how the story just completely flips when the mechanism changes.
Yes.
When a generative AI does the same thing, conceptually, it analyzes massive amounts of music, learns the patterns, and then generates something totally new.
It's immediately called theft,
Piracy.
plagiarism.
It's condemned, and you have to ask why.
Well, the mechanism is conceptually similar, isn't it? I mean, the difference isn't the act of being influenced. It's the tool. It's the scale.
The scale and the speed.
Right.
Yeah.
A human might take 20 years to really internalize a whole genre, and AI does it in, what, seconds?
And our sources point out that human music has always been this patchwork quilt of influences. It's how art works. We build on the past.
So are we really angry about the process? Or are we just scared of the efficiency of the machine doing it?
That is the absolute critical caution here. If you look at music history, this exact tension pops up again and again. Think about sampling in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, for sure.
You had people, traditionalists, arguing that a DJ looping a 2-second drum break was just stealing.
And now it's a totally accepted art form.
Eventually, yeah, the law evolved, even if it meant all these expensive clearance processes. But that fundamental question is still there. Why do we celebrate a human for absorbing influences, but we call a machine a criminal for doing it perfectly?
It feels like the industry is just drawing this arbitrary line.
Yeah.
And it's a line based on, what? The identity of the learner. That feels like it would be really hard to defend in court.
It's almost impossible, because if the AI's output is genuinely transformative, which it often is, then the legal argument against it just starts to, fall apart. Especially when you compare it to how humans work.
So the legal system has to figure this out, and fast.
They do. Because if they rule that AI training is a copyright breach, they are basically creating a new definition of creativity that only applies to biology, to people.
Not to their tools.
Not to their tools. And that just sets a confusing, maybe even an impossible precedent for what comes next.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's move from that philosophical idea of creativity to where the real fire is.
The money.
The money, the power dynamics. Because if this isn't purely about artistic integrity, then you have to ask, what is the industry actually trying to protect?
And you see this perspective all through the sources, this idea that these big lawsuits, Warner versus Suno, they're not really fundamentally about protecting creativity. Right. They're about maintaining control, protecting the financial structure that's been in place for, 50, 60 years?
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've got commentary that just cuts right through all the artistic talk. One source just says it bluntly.
What does it say?
Quote, "At the deepest level, these lawsuits aren't really about protecting creativity or saving artists. They're about who gets to stand between the artist and the money and maintain the gatekeeping."
Wow. That's a heavy accusation.
It's a direct shot at the entire power structure.
And what it implies is that the problem for them isn't that an AI copied a song. The problem is that a tool like Suno lets a user create a fully mastered track in minutes.
And potentially distribute it themselves instantly.
Instantly. It bypasses all those gatekeepers, the labels, the publishers, the distributors, the lawyers. They're all cut out of the loop.
And that just completely upends their economic model. I mean, think about it. Historically, to make a professional track, you needed a producer, session musicians, studio time.
And a label to even get it heard. Each one of those steps, someone had to approve it and someone took a cut.
Right.
Suno is a massive equalizer in that sense. It just crushes the barrier to entry. Someone with lyrics in their head, but no money or musical skill can suddenly create something.
It's democratization for a lot of people.
But it's financial terror for the hierarchy, and that's why the language is so strong. There was another quote that just said, "There's no theft, just lawyers gatekeeping money and power for the wealthy."
Okay, but let's push back on that no theft idea for a second. I get the gatekeeper argument, I do. But you can't just dismiss the professional musician's point of view.
Of course not.
They have a real economic problem here, right? If the market is suddenly flooded with infinite, free, AI-generated music, doesn't that just destroy the value of music made by a human who spent years honing their craft?
Absolutely. The tension isn't just, big corporations versus cool new tech. It's also established professional labor versus accessible automated labor.
Right.
A professional musician sees their life's work being devalued because suddenly the competition is infinite and costs nothing to produce. The anxiety for artists is very, very real.
So the key takeaway for you, listening, is to see how the legal fight might be using the very real fears of human artists as a tool.
As a mechanism to preserve an old financial model. That's the core of it.
So moving on from the money, let's get back to the philosophy, but this time about ownership itself. This gets really thorny. We're talking about the building blocks of music.
Yeah.
Like who owns a simple chord progression, a IIVV, or a basic 44 drum beat?
This is where that idea of a collective inheritance comes in, and we should probably define that for you clearly.
Yeah, let's do that.
Collective inheritance is basically all the musical language, the scales, the rhythms, the common harmonies. They're so old, so fundamental that no one can claim to own them. They're like communal property.
Recycled and reshaped by every generation of artists.
Exactly. And yet the lawsuits are focused on the idea that these AI models were trained on specific modern copyrighted songs.
Without permission, without paying.
Right. The industry lawyers are claiming that the training itself is a form of unauthorized copying. They say it's different from a human learning because the machine literally copied the data file to analyze it.
Even if the final song it makes is totally new.
Even then, and this goes back to that scale problem, the human brain is a black box, legally. We can't prove exactly which songs influenced a composer.
But with an AI...
With an AI, you have the receipts. You can prove it ingested millions of copyrighted files. The difference isn't the learning, it's the provability of the learning material.
And this whole idea, this absorption mechanism, it leads to this really weird, uncomfortable conclusion about who owns the final product.
It really does.
Okay, let's do a hypothetical, make this real for people. Let's say I, a musician, gives Suno a unique 10-line poem I wrote, and a simple little 4-bar melody I hummed. The AI takes that, and it generates a completely unique 3-minute, fully arranged song. Something way more complex than I could ever have made. Now, who owns that song?
That is the new can of worms, a huge one.
Right.
Because according to current U.S. copyright law, a work has to come from a human author, so the AI can't own it.
Okay, so I own it.
Well, maybe not. If your input, the lyrics, and that little melody is considered too small, or de minimis, compared to the final complex song the AI generated, then you might not be able to claim copyright over the whole thing.
Wait, what? So the human provides the creative seed, but because the tool did most of the heavy lifting, the song is an orphan. It has no owner.
Precisely. If we apply that old copyright logic to this new way of creating, the human might only own their original little bits, the lyrics, the melody, the rest of it, the amazing arrangement the machine made.
Could be uncopyrightable.
Or
public domain. Anyone to just take.
It could be. Which completely flips our idea of what it means to collaborate with a tool. It's a staggering implication.
Because the whole point of using these tools is to make something bigger than your original idea. But if doing that means you lose ownership, then what's the incentive?
Exactly. It's a legal paradox. If the AI is just a pen, the human owns it. If the AI is a collaborator, the law has no idea what to do.
And this whole legal mess leads us right into our final point, which is this. this blatant inconsistency in how fair use is being applied.
Yeah, why does music seem to be in its own special protected category here?
It's so weird. Why is music fighting this battle alone?
It is the most glaring inconsistency in the whole legal landscape right now. We saw a great question from a commentator at Adilsa Kill Songs who basically asked,
What'd they say?
isn't ChatGPT trained on authors' writings, and aren't video generation models trained on Hollywood films? If that's considered fair use, then why is music and audio treated differently?
So what does this all mean? It means when you look at text AI or even image AI, there's been, a much greater acceptance of using copyrighted data for training.
Right, under the idea of transformative use, the argument being that you're creating a capability to make new things, not just copying the old ones.
But music is different.
Music and audio seem to be stuck in a regulatory time warp. The music industry's IP rules are just so incredibly rigid. It comes from decades of complicated licenses for sampling, for mechanical rights, for everything.
So their whole history is built on, if you use any tiny piece of it, you have to pay.
Exactly. So they are way more resistant to that transformative use defense that's working better in text and image lawsuits.
They see an AI music model not as a tool for creating a capability, but as a black box designed specifically to create competing products.
And that demand for consistency is just so crucial. The courts can't just accept fair use for training data in text and then arbitrarily say no for audio. That's not law, that's just protecting one industry over another.
So these hard conversations about what fair use means for AI,
they're not optional. They are absolutely necessary if we want any kind of predictable future for creators and for tech.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has covered a ton of ground. We've gone from the philosophy of learning versus stealing to the power dynamics of who's trying to protect old money.
All the way to the weird paradox of who even owns an AI-generated song.
And finally, this inconsistent application of fair use.
It's clear that the choice the industry is facing it's existential. We are literally deciding who gets to be a creator, who controls the tools, and who profits from it all. So we really encourage you to keep thinking about these implications.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to take with you, building on that idea of music as a collective inheritance. If the lawyers, if the gatekeepers succeed in protecting the old financial model, if they block AI from learning from our musical history, are we actually risking the stagnation of music itself? Are we cutting off access to that collective inheritance from the very tools that could reinvent it in ways we can't even imagine?
It's a lot to think about. Thank you for joining us for this intense exploration.
We'll catch you next time for the next deep dive.
Right now, there is a massive legal and honestly philosophical battle brewing that is shaking the music and tech worlds to their core. We're talking about AI, we're talking about creativity, and the very future of how music gets made. But this isn't just a story about technology. As you're about to see, it's really a story about power, money, and who gets to be in control.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. The whole debate we're seeing play out, it's not some simple story of artists versus machines. No, it's a struggle over who controls the industry itself, who gets to be the gatekeeper, who decides who gets paid, and whose music actually gets heard. That is the real fight hiding just beneath the surface.
So, this leads us to the central question. And it's a huge contradiction right at the heart of this whole thing. Where exactly do we draw the line between learning and theft? And more importantly, does that line somehow move just because a machine is involved? Let's unpack that.
I mean, think about how any human artist works. A musician listens to tons of music, right? They absorb influences, they learn patterns, and they transform all of that into something new. We call that artistry. But now, look at how an AI model works. It analyzes thousands of songs, learns the musical patterns, and generates new work from those influences. On paper, it is functionally the exact same process.
It's a pretty powerful question, isn't it? When a human does it, we celebrate it as inspiration, as learning. But when a machine does the same thing, the language immediately shifts to theft and copying. This is the fundamental double standard that we have to confront if we really want to understand what's at stake here.
And this contradiction is so deep because music has never ever been created in a vacuum. It's always been this kind of patchwork quilt of influences, right? A collective inheritance passed down and reshaped by generations of artists. Every single chord progression, every rhythm, it's all built on what came before it. So if all human music is essentially a remix, why are we holding AI to a completely different, almost impossible standard?
Which brings us to our next big point, this clash between empowerment and gatekeeping. You have to ask, is AI an equalizer for the little guy, or is it a threat to the establishment? Because for every person who sees it as a danger, there's someone else who sees it as a tool that could finally break down the old walls.
Think about it. Tools like Suno are just radically lowering the barrier to entry. All of a sudden, you don't need a fortune for studio time or a famous producer to bring a musical idea to life. For so many aspiring creators out there, this is an incredible, incredible equalizer, a real game changer. But let's be fair and look at the other side. Imagine you're a musician who has spent years, decades even, honing your craft. This tidal wave of AI-generated music can feel deeply, deeply threatening. There's a very real fear that the value of human skill, of all that hard work, is being diluted in this ocean of instant machine-made content. And this user comment really just cuts right to the frustration that a lot of people are feeling. The argument here is that these big legal battles, they aren't actually about protecting art at all. They're about protecting an old financial model, one where a very select few control the flow of money and power.
Okay, now we get to what might be the most mind-bending part of this whole debate. This is the elephant in the room that almost no one is talking about. It is the ownership paradox. The process seems simple enough, right? A human creator has an idea, maybe some lyrics or a little melody, and they feed it into an AI. The AI then takes that little spark and generates a full, unique piece of music that the human couldn't have created on their own. It's a collaboration.
But this simple little collaboration leads to a profoundly complex question. Who actually owns the final product? Is it the human who had the initial idea, or is it the AI that did the heavy lifting of generating the new piece of music? And here is the uncomfortable truth. If we apply our traditional, old-school copyright logic, the entity that actually generates the new, unique work could be considered the author. This means the AI might have a stronger legal claim to the song than the human who prompted it. It's a paradox that completely turns our entire understanding of creativity and ownership on its head. So, to get a better perspective on all this, it really helps to see how this whole thing is playing out in other fields. Because the intense legal battle we're seeing in music, well, it isn't happening in quite the same way in other creative industries. Let's take a quick look.
This user points out a massive inconsistency. AI models for text and video, like ChatGPT or Sora, are also trained on enormous amounts of copyrighted material. Yet in those fields, the argument that this is fair use, that it's transformative and doesn't hurt the original market, that argument is actually gaining ground. So the big question is, why is the music industry reacting so differently?
And you can see the difference right here, clear as day. With text and video, the debate seems to be moving towards accepting AI training as fair use. But with music, it's a totally different story. The legal stance is, as one person put it, stuck in the Stone Age. Music is being treated with this unique level of hostility, which really makes you wonder, what is it about music that's so different? Which brings us right back to where we started. When you look at all the contradictions, the power dynamics, and the legal inconsistencies, you have to ask yourself, what is this fight really about? Is it some noble defense of human creativity? Or is it a desperate attempt by an established industry to protect its power structure from a technology that threatens to change the rules for everyone? That's the question I'll leave you with.